Our guest right now is one of the best fighters in the world, Mr. Frank Shamrock. Frank, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And also with me is my co-host, Xander. So thank you for being here as well.
Thanks as well, Fred. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start first with updates about you, Frank. So, like, what's the update? What are you doing? What's the project? So on and so forth.
Well, I'm doing a lot of beach uh, existing, which is campfires, meetings, barbecues, and whatnot. But I'm going on my what is it, 14th or 15th year of retirement, which is equal to the amount of time I competed. So I got to figure out what I'm going to do in the next year or so. Because in a year it'll be 16 years retired, 16 years competed, and I might do something different. But I still do my charity work, and I still do my social programs and stuff, and I still work in business, but it's mainly like an advisor, and I manage things. But yeah, I'm wearing my house slippers. You can't see them, but they're the most comfortable after you spend all day in the sand.
I mean, how's the transition like? From fighting, like I guess most of the time to just relaxing, being with your family and all. Like, how was the transition? I know it has been like 16 years, so I would assume you figured it out already.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a really good question because a lot of professional athletes go through the same experience, right? Like, so we're always training, we're always focused, we always have this, mission or high stress. And then when it goes away, you don't really know what to do or how to sort of, live your life like that. And I was really lucky that, part of the catalyst for me retiring was my little girl had been born. And, I wanted to be a dad, I wanted to be present, and I wanted to not be training every day. So I was able to kind of baby step my way out. Like I slowly closed down my businesses, and I slowly, removed myself from one world, and I, became like crazy dad at the playground thing. Um, but for me, it was extremely healing, and it was really um, therapeutic because I'd spent so long fighting. Like I was all broken up, and you know, I never had a chance to deal with all the emotional issues and like social issues that I had before I started fighting. The things that sent me to prison, like things that were really hard, and so all that came on me as I retired. And so it was a process. But the original plan was I was just gonna hang out for 8 years, 0 to 8 with my little girl. Then I was going to go back to work, doing what I do, which is I was trained in asset management, asset class management, talent management, fighting, fighting training. So I got all these skills in my career, and then I just kind of shelved them. Um, but yeah, after 8 years, I was supposed to go back, but then my wife and I got divorced, and then the money systems changed, like the business changed, everything changed, and then I was like, I don't really know what to do, so I've just been kind of floating around for the past few years, and a lot of it's been based on the pain. I've had back pain, like really really bad back pain. So it's only in the past maybe 6 months that I've solved that. So now I'm looking for the next thing. I tried boxing in the park program where like we all got together in the park and boxed, which was so much fun. I totally loved it. But after, I don't know, 10, 12 weeks, my back just gave out. And so it's been a matter of finding like what I can do physically, what I have to do to maintain that physicality, and then, the stuff that I want to do. And I think that's a blessing, right? Because I don't have to fight anymore. I fought for
That's
so
true.
long, and that was the only way to make money. There was no other way to make money. I don't have any skills. Like I have one skill, it's fighting. I can beat people up. Like I know how to do it, like a master. But when that goes away, you got to educate yourself and like figure out what's next. So I was blessed to have my, business education a bit informal, but it's helped me in every way. And then I think the biggest blessing was just I got to spend. I mean, it's been 14 years with my little girl, just hanging out, doing dumb stuff, being like a regular dad, which is just, fantastic.
14 years, but you still look good. Like, you stay fit. Like,
Thanks.
do you take care
Yeah.
of your body like every day?
Yeah. Yeah. Every day, I still follow the same routine. It's not as stringent as when I was fighting. I'm not like a professional fighter, so I don't need to. But every day I care for my, mind, body, and spirit. And it like happens as soon as I wake up. Bing, I look what's going on in the mind, and I stand up, what's going on with the body, and then and then I do something for my spirit every day. And I think that's we've lost a lot of colleagues, I've lost a lot of you know fellow fighters my age, because you finish this journey and you're just broken. I mean, you're literally just destroyed. If you go more than 10 years, like you're jacked up at the end of this thing. And so a lot of
Yeah,
them
that's
didn't
true.
transition. A lot of them didn't care for their bodies. A lot of them didn't care for their spirits. And I saw the results of that. So yeah, for me, it's a daily, man. It's like traditional martial arts. Every day starts mind, body, spirit. That's how I plan my existence.
So you know what? My buddy
Yeah.
right here is the reason why he got into mixed martial arts is because of you. So I'm sure he brought a lot of questions. So I hope you're ready. Sander,
Yeah,
I know
heck
you have
yeah.
questions. Feel free to ask.
Oh, uh, you talk about your back pain. So, my first question is, what advice can you give to the upcoming fighters and trainers alike for longevity?
Yeah, well, it's just what I learned. If it hurts, it's probably not the best thing for you. You know what I mean? Like, there's exhaustion, there's fatigue, there's, strain, there's stress, and then there's getting hurt, like hurting things. And so I realized, like, early on, bro, if it hurts, like, that's not good. Like, it's not a good thing. Figure out why it hurts. Stop doing that. And I was very lucky to have a education and an appreciation of bodybuilding. So I studied biomechanics of the human body. So I would meet techniques. People would be like, "Do this," and I'd be like, "I don't know, but it hurts my shoulder." When I do that, and then I'd be like, "Listen, I think it hurts because it's out of alignment with this tendon and the rotation of the shoulder," and they'd look at me like I was kind of crazy. But I realized, like, early on, people aren't studying that deep and protecting themselves. People aren't really looking after themselves. They're going on a journey with someone else's information. And when you're a young fighter, when you're a young athlete at anything, you got to know your body more than anything. Like, it's the machine, like it's the tool. So without it, you're just not going to be successful. And then, if you are going to go to the greatest heights, like, you got to know that body like nobody else. And I had to tell some of my coaches, no, I don't like that. It hurts my hip when I do that. Like, that feels weird. And they'd be like, but we've always done this. Then they would walk away with like a hip limp, or they would, talk about their hip surgery they just had. And I'd be like, I don't know, bro. But nobody had said anything. It's the way that it was always done. No one mentioned it. Like, oh, my hip just hurts. I'll go home and ice my hip. But because I had this other knowledge of like the biomechanics of the human body, I understood like, hey, I'm only 22 years old. What's going to happen when I'm 72 years old? Like, how am I going to be walking when I'm 82 years old? Because I see these 82-year-old guys that haven't done anything, and they're all gimped up. Like, they haven't, they've just lived a normal life and they got a limp. And so imagine what we're going to feel like or look like that if we don't care for the machine over the long term. And so that was like my first thing, and I was blessed to have that mindset and share it with many others, because yeah, I mean, a lot of my colleagues, they look like crabs. They're just crook kneed, broken. Like, it's just terrible. And I broke my spine when I was 16 years old. Like, they told me I'd never play sports. They told me I needed immediate spinal surgery. I was going to wear a cast for a year, and I was going to be in pain for the rest of my life. And I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm going to become the greatest fighter on the planet." When I was 16. But it gave me an awareness and understanding, like, hey, man, this is what's wrong with me. I have to care for it every day. Because if I don't, eventually it'll just break down and I'll be like a broken down machine. And so for young guys, your body's a machine. Care for it. And you're going to live a long time. And so if you don't care for that, think of an old car. If you don't care that old car, in about 50 years, that car is going to be so janky and broken and traumatized. And that's how the human body is.
Go on. Do you
That's
have other
awesome
questions?
advice. Yeah, because that's actually an awesome advice. Because at the gym we are taught that no pain, no gain, right? So thank you so much for that advice. It's so awesome.
Yeah, and I was taught the same. I was taught the same mentality. But when you start doing, high impact, really aggressive, physical things, you got to understand what is happening to your body and what the, risks are. And then once you figure those out, like, oh my God, this is how I get hurt, then you got to figure out how to not get hurt, because that's the real game. like performing. Stop! You stop! Sorry, that's Mango. She's my guard lion.
It's okay.
You see her?
Oh, that's a cutie.
She's guarding.
What's
Yeah,
his
she's
name
guarding.
or her name?
Mango. Yeah, she's a guard
Oh,
lion.
so cute.
It's, she's guarding the fort. But yeah, I was never taught this. I was never taught. In fact, I was taught that getting punched in the head is fine. Just don't let it be too hard. This is literally what my coach told me. And I go, what? He's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's okay. Just don't do it hard. Well, come to find out, you could never get punched in the head. Like it is never a thing. You should always avoid it. The whole strategy should be around not getting punched in the head because every time you punch the head, you get brain damage. You literally shake the brain, which breaks up the brain, which breaks up the connections to the other, nerves and connectivities, and then that's how you get brain damage. And no one told me this, like literally nobody, until I met a neuroscientist who had done these studies on the brain. He's like, "Yeah, bro, you can't do that. It's like it's not good. You can't do that." And so I had to adopt an entirely new strategy because nobody told me I shouldn't get punched in the head. They told me, "Yeah, don't worry about it. Just don't let it be hard."
Okay, so I was watching one of your videos, Frank, and I see that you are also into um, to speaking
Yeah.
or being a keynote speaker. Like, how did you get into speaking? Like, was it innate in you when when you were young, or did it happen after your fighting career?
Yeah, it was the opposite. I was terribly afraid of it because I had a really tough childhood and I had childhood abuse and stuff like that happened to me. So I wasn't a good communicator verbally or emotionally because all that stuff has been kind of beaten down. And so um, it was just a byproduct of the times, right? Like I won the UFC championship, which was the biggest thing in the world at the time, but I won it for the smallest audience that's ever existed for our sport because we'd gotten kicked off cable like a few months before. So we lost 90% of our audience. So it didn't matter that I was doing these amazing, extraordinary things. Nobody could see it. And so I was like, oh man, well that didn't work out that good. It was a bad timing thing. So then I became the spokesman for the sport to try to get us back on cable. And so my job was to go around and talk to these guys in suits who were cable executives and like find out what they needed from us to get us back on cable. It was literally my job. I have no education, but I'd put a suit on. I'd go to these events. I'd talk to them, and I'd go back to my boss, Bob Meyerowitz, the original UFC owner, and I'd say, "Hey, what they want rounds, and they want weight classes, and they want gloves," and then I would tell them what they told me. Um, but it was in that process where I realized, like, man, I'm not a good communicator. Like, the only thing good I'm communicating is the value of this sport and what it's done for me. And that was really personal, and people liked it because I'd be like, man, it got me out of prison and it set my life straight. And you don't understand what we're doing. It's so amazing. And I would tell people the values of martial arts and what it did for me and why that was valuable to everybody else and why we should get back on television because of it. Um, but it was a really hard sell. People weren't into it. People, and I wasn't a good communicator. So I realized the future for me, if I was going to become a broadcaster or a spokesman or one of these guys for real, that I would have to get skills to actually do that. Like I'd have to be able to speak in front of a crowd and move the message and do all these things, which I didn't have the confidence or skill set to do so. And so I started speaking. I was like, oh, well, that's how you do it. You get up on stage and you just go for it. And then when I was looking for my, where do I start and you know, how do I start? Yeah, how do I start? I realized like I had my people, and my people were the people in juvenile halls, like people in the youth institutions, because that's where I was for most of my life. From 12 to 17, I was I was incarcerated, or I was a ward of the state. And so, I was always sitting in those chairs, and there was always some speaker coming to speak to us. And they were they were completely disconnected. They were, nobody understood what it felt like or how they got in the seat I was sitting in. Like they just didn't get it. And so I was like, these are my people. So I started speaking at the juvenile halls, and that's how I built my speaking career. Just went around all the juvenile halls, and I'd be like, tell my story, and then I slowly crafted that to become better and better. And then, we always had this, if you raise your hand and you go on the journey, we'll take care of your martial arts. We'll provide, an education like I got for you, if you're willing to do it. And that whole process of, sharing my story, figuring out speaking, giving back, and being kind of with my people, I think, just developed this really um, tailored ability to speak now. Now I can speak to anybody about anything. I go all over. I speak. It's crazy. I speak to corporations. I'm going to speak to the army next, um, because I know how to speak now, and I got it from those youth institutions and from the young men that raised their hand and said, "Yeah, I'll try to figure it out, and I'll try to do what's right."
Yeah. You talk about going through a lot of tough times. So my question is, what advice can you give to kids who are going through tough times?
It'll end. Good news. It'll eventually. Time will change, and especially if you're doing things to move you forward. For many years, I was doing things to move me backward. I was so mad. I was, I didn't know why I was so emotionally unstable and why I was so mad at the universe. And I wouldn't find out till I was 37 years old that my mom used to lock me in closets when I was a baby. Literally a baby. She'd go lock me in the closet for hours and hours to shut me up. And I didn't realize all that stuff had happened to me, but man, I was angry at the world. And I was committing these crimes. I was doing all this disruptive and bad things. But the second I stopped doing it, my whole life changed. I was like, wow, what is this? Because I was creating the issues. I didn't even know I was creating the issues until I went to prison. I had all this time to think about, I'm a knucklehead. What am I doing? And gosh, you're right. Like I am the guy. Nobody's putting these, things in my hand to steal. I'm doing it myself. And so once I took the responsibility for what I was doing and where I was and what was happening, then I could make some real decisions on how to get out. And for me, it was about learning, training, and then fighting. I mean, I got out from fighting. If it wasn't for combat sports, I'd still be in prisons and doing, all the stuff that I was doing, because that study, that community, that team, every day it's the same guys going, "Hey, how do we figure this out, man? Like, we got to get this, we got to make it better. We got to keep working on this, and we got to work on it together." And I had just never had that in my life, but it just centered me and grounded me as a human being. And that's how everything's done, in truth. So, yeah, if you're in a bad spot, just keep pushing forward.
Now you already started talking about fighting. So let's go to fighting. Let's talk about the fun part. So I know Sander have lots of inputs about fighting, more than I do, because he's an MMA guy. That's why he's here. So let's talk about your fighting style. Like, I know people have defined your fighting style, but in your own words, like, how would you describe it? Like, are you the
Oh,
guy who is a striker? Are you a
nope,
grappler?
nah. Um,
What's your style?
my style is I created the first complete mixed martial arts fighting system. And then I proved it all, and then I rolled that shit out like it was butter. But my roots were, I started in submission wrestling, the pancrase Japanese style, which is very focused on movement, holds, activity. It's basically a grappling fighting performance for the Japanese, because they're highly cultured in that. So I started in that style, and then the big feud with the Gracies came along with my brother and all the Gracies, and so I was sent to learn jujitsu with another Japanese fellow. Gosh, it's probably in 1995 or six or something. I went to Los Angeles and I trained with Gokor Chavincian, and I studied jujitsu for like 3 months or 4 months or whatever it was. But I counted that as a study because I learned a lot of stuff there. I learned a ton of different grappling concepts and ideas. And then after that, I hooked up with Maurice Smith, and that began my kickboxing understanding of striking. And then after Maurice, I hooked up with the wrestling coach Eric Deuce, and he was a Stanford wrestling coach, and he had wrestled Kevin Jackson in Olympic trials, I believe. Um, so I just kind of bounced around and grabbed all the information that I thought was necessary at the time. Because at the time, the wrestlers took over, the strikers took over, like the sport was going through this seesaw of discovery because nobody knew what really worked. So they would be like, "Oh, this is working this time," and then it would work for a few fights, and then it would stop working because it wasn't a system. It was just that, oh, the wrestlers are tough; they're hard to get off you. Oh, they're, these guys are this and that. And so people weren't coming up with solutions; they were just bending their style to try to make it work. And then I saw the whole thing differently. I saw it like it should be one system that flows together with correct biomechanics. Like it should just flow through your body. So you can, as Bruce Lee says, move like water, flow, have all these, you know, artistic or spiritual or full, body activities. And so then I looked at the whole thing differently. I started looking at like bodybuilding. I was like, well, wait a minute, aren't we just technically building certain segments, certain techniques, certain ideas, certain roles? And then I just kept studying. And so by the end, I was studying boxing. My coach was Tony DiMaria, and um, that was just before I retired because I almost went on a boxing career because I fell in love with boxing. I'm like, Tony, I'm going to be a world champion. Like I know the owners of Showtime, and we're gonna do this. And I went to one professional boxing match with Vic Darchinyan at 112 pounds, and by the fourth round, I turned to the CEO of Showtime and I said, "Bro, there's no way I'm doing this. These guys are killing each other." But it was just a progressive study, um, and I wasn't bound to anything. And I think that's some advice I can give to younger people as well as people just studying martial arts in general. Um, I came from a fighting world. I've never studied martial arts like a normal person studies martial arts. I literally never have. It's just that I became a fighter. And then through the study of fighting, I ended up in the martial arts community because they had all this information. And then they would share it and I would share mine. It's a community of education and respect and knowledge. Um, But when you roll back all these martial arts, they all started for a reason. What is a martial art? It's an art to combat a social conflict so the people are okay. People have decided this ain't right, so we're going to fight. But those current situations have all passed. Like we're not kicking people off horses, we're not fighting guys with sticks, we're not fighting guys with lances. All that stuff is gone. And so when I came into this martial arts world, I was like, what are we studying? And they'd be like, oh, it's this, and it's from this era, and it's for this reason. I'd be like, sounds great. Let me show you what's going on right now. And then I'll be like, holy crap. And I'd be like, yeah, we're studying the human body and how that works. And so my mindset of thinking differently about it and not being stuck to a martial art really helped me because I didn't know. I didn't know that all these things were in place. I didn't know that these systems were how they were, that they've been going on for thousands of years. I'm like, does it matter? Because if you lose the fight, like none of it matters. If you're dead, none of it matters. So shouldn't we study all the real stuff as much as humanly possible? And the smart people went, "That's a great idea, bro." And then the other ones would just fight and push against it. But it was me going, "Wait a minute, love it. Is it biomechanically correct? Check. Uh, how does the energy feel? Okay, good. That's a check. Like, okay, great. What is the impact? Okay, great. Like, it was only me going down the scientific list of all things that was then making people go, yeah, you're right, bro. That doesn't, or this could be better, or that could be better. Um, but yeah, if you keep your mind active, and that's where I was the only guy with a notebook at all the training sessions. Everybody else you know, was looking at me all silly. Now it's a thing. Now you bring your notebook. Now you write down your workouts. Now you go through all your metrics because the science behind the human body is solid. So all you need is intention and technique and focus, and you can technically do anything.
Nice. Sant, do you have a question?
Yeah, a lot of questions, but I'm gonna go straight to the reason why I enrolled in the gym is when I saw you fight. Ortiz, like
Mm.
after the fight, I don't know, you look like you're still ready to go. And my question is, what was your preparation for that fight? And like, what was the feeling after you defeated a guy like almost twice your size? Like, it's bigger, right? And then you smashed him. What was your
Yeah,
preparation?
he was a monster. I and I knew I was going to beat him. I just didn't know how. Because I love Tito, but he's just not a sharp guy. He's a tough guy, strong guy, good heart, but he's not like a rocket scientist. Nor am I. Fair enough. Um, but yeah, I mean, the strategy with Tito was he was so big and so strong, and then he had sort of that emerging style of what you'd call like ground and pound, boxing and wrestling. Um, and the hard part about that is I never wrestled. Like I never wrestled. I went to 2 days of wrestling camp and I got kicked out. So I never had any wrestling training. Like high school wrestlers would just crush me, in wrestling matches because I never really understood the skill until I studied later on in my 30s. So I knew at that time, like Tito's physicality and everything he's bringing was dangerous in the way that he could just beat me up physically. He wasn't going to beat me technically, like with a hold or with this or that or whatever, but that he could just beat me up because he was a giant man. He was like my big brother type experience. In fact, my big brother told me, "Don't fight him. He's too big. Like he's the next size man up." Um, but for me, like my preparation was for the very first time I did track and field training. So I actually hired Jerry Rice's track and field coach, who he was an NFL superstar receiver, and I got on the track. I put on track shoes, and for the very first time in my career, I ran 400s, like I did sprints, running backwards, like all these crazy things I'd never done in my life. Um, but I realized like I would have to be way faster than he was, and I could never slow down because if I slowed down, he would smash me. Like he would literally, put the weight on me. And there's one moment where I flip around and he just knees me in the head. It's very short, you barely see it, but he like splits my whole head open. I get like 8 stitches in my head because his knee is ginormous. He's huge. Um, so yeah, the risk of the size and the weight, caused me to really focus just on the speed and the ability to maintain that speed for stop it for a really long time. Um, and then, yeah, that was the deciding factor. Like you can see, I do some crazy fast moves in that fight that kind of switch the
Yeah.
momentum when it's needed. Um, and that was all from the, adding a track and field, and then also even by then learning how to breathe better through my technical movements. Because it almost becomes like a dance, art form when you're really into it. And so on that fight in particular, because my vascular condition had improved so greatly with all the track and field, I found that I could, breathe through these really fast techniques and it wouldn't fatigue me. I'd just be like, oh, look, I just did 87 circles and I feel fine. And previous to that, I didn't have that. I do like three or four and I'd be like, okay, that feels funny. So having that extra level of vascular conditioning and that kind of fast twitch, explosive sprinting like structure, that's what made the difference.
Nice.
And it showed. It showed. Like
Yeah.
that fight was like so perfect. Like your moves, everything. Uh,
I have a
what about
question
the?
about that. Sorry, Sam. Why didn't there was like a second fight? What happened to that?
Oh, with Tito?
Yeah.
No,
How
I
come there was
never.
no a follow up? Yeah.
I mean, because I whipped his ass, and then I became a free agent after that. So the backstory behind that fight was about 2 fights before I got my first entertainment attorney. And I'm showed him my contract, and he's like, "Oh my God, these guys are like raping. Like, what is happening here?" And I go, "I don't know. I'm just a dumb fighter." And so he gave me an education on business, intellectual properties, the revenues and values that are floating around. Um, and so when I did that fight, um, I signed a new contract with the UFC with Tito as the first fight. It was supposed to be a 4 or 5 fight contract. But I put a line in via my attorney that said if I ever publicly renounce my championship and give this title back, then the rest of my contract is null and void. So I was going to fight Tito, beat him regardless, and retire. And then it took me out of the game, at least with the UFC. They were never going to let me fight him again inside the UFC because I was a free agent. So the opportunity almost came along years later when he was kind of broken down and needed money. But I was too old by then, and I really wasn't interested in
Okay, go on, Sant. At least we know now because we've been thinking
it. Yeah,
about it.
yeah. I'm sure he would want a rematch, but he wasn't. Um, the other thing about Tito is after I fought him, he's a good kid. Like he was a good guy. I knew him from before. He hung out with some knuckleheads, but he was genuinely a good guy. And so him and I became friends. And then after our fight, he just couldn't believe I beat him. He's like, I don't understand. I go, well, why don't you come out and train with me and I'll show you what I did. So you don't have to happen. So this doesn't have to happen to you again. And so he came out and trained with me for a week, vastly improved his game. And yeah, and I already moved on and, done the next thing.
You have a follow up to that, Sant?
You mentioned earlier that you never trained wrestling, but I think on your first UFC fight, you defeated a like highly decorated wrestler. How did you do it?
Yeah. Well, by then I was training in wrestling. But when I say that because after I beat Kevin Jackson, my first UFC, literally every wrestler on the planet thought I was one of the greatest wrestlers on the planet because he was one of the greatest wrestlers on the planet. So I'd go to
Right.
Iowa State and they'd be like, "Oh, Mr. Shamrock, you're the greatest wrestler ever," and I'd be like, I get murdered by these middle school kids. Like I just didn't. It took me years to understand the dynamics of it. And then part of it is, because the way my back is broken, I can't lose posture in my spine. I can't lose it because then it gets unstable and it hurts. And so a lot of the wrestling moves are hard for me. Structurally and physically, they're actually hard for me to do. There are a lot of fatigue and there's a lot of stress on my spine. And so my body goes, well, then don't do it. Let's do something else. And there was so much to study in fighting that even though wrestling was really dominant and powerful, I saw these other things as, equally so. And then in my, was my 30s, then I really started studying wrestling. But it was after I beat Kevin, but that was all to my coach, Eric Deuce. Eric Deuce had wrestled him in the Olympic trials and beat him in wrestling. And so I looked this thing up and I go, oh, he's got to win. And I called that guy up and I was like, bro, I'm fighting this guy. You beat him. Show me how. And then together we discovered the pieces that were missing from the wrestling education and the mixed martial arts fighting. And I just happened to expose it because, I'm a nerd and Eric was my coach. But yeah, I'm a terrible wrestler. In fact, if you watch remember the Igor Zinoviev fight where I stovepipe him on the head with my double leg takedown? That was done to me by a high school kid in Dallas, Texas, a few weeks before. And he literally crippled me. I was under a desk for hours because I could barely move because he stovepiped me and traumatized me. But he gave me the idea. And I asked him, how'd you do that? He goes, oh, you never grab the head and go over the body because then you're exposed to being lifted. Because I just stood up and lifted you and then turned you upside down. And my brain went, okay. And that's how I beat Igor Zinoviev. This high school wrestler taught me that. But it's all the learning and being conscious of things that, hey, I should do this. Like, hey, getting punched in the head is bad. Hey, breathing, flow, energy, spirituality, art, like all that stuff is important because that's what makes it all come together the way you can see things. I was just seeing the stuff that nobody else could see because I was doing the study. I was doing the work. So it would pop up and I'd go, hey, guys, what about this? And we wouldn't know. So we talk about it, figure it out, try the technique. And then, next thing you know, we're doing it.
Okay, so I just want to ask, based on your learnings, what would be like your top three martial arts that every new beginner or every beginner should learn first?
Ooh, I
Just
would,
top three.
yeah. Okay. I would start everybody in judo.
Judo.
Yeah, judo. Yeah, judo teaches a great stance, a great posture, and then most importantly, they teach you how to fall. So you'll never get hurt doing martial arts if you learn judo. If you don't, it's a possibility. And then I would teach boxing. Yeah. And then, well, I guess boxing or Muay Thai, one of the two. That's what I would teach. Judo has enough holds to get you where you need to go to do all the stuff you want to do. Um, and Judo has enough wrestling, if you will, to sort of cover the takedown needs and the distance and all the other stuff. Uh, but I mean, people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, what do I do with my son?" And what's the best? Um, the best is whatever some little kid is interested in. That keeps him active and interested in learning about his body and his mind and his spirit. Like that's literally the best because all these arts, unless you're studying to be a wrestler or trying to be a professional boxer, or they're all about social activity and physical commitment and goal. Just learning about yourself and the art itself. Very rarely if never, are you going to go out and get in a street fight. I've never been in a street fight since I've been a professional athlete. Like nobody comes up and bothers me or goes, "Hey, this that," and I never feel the need to get into a situation with anybody. Um, but if it happens, I'm fully trained and prepared to do whatever, and I can protect my team and my family and whatever. But when you have the skill, you rarely ever use it. It's just a value item. That's what the kids and the parents and the people are really looking for when they come for martial arts. And that's what I figured out when I went into the martial arts world. It's not about killing people. I was there to kill people all day long. That's my only job was to figure out how to destroy people as quickly as possible so I can get my money and go home and not get hurt. And then I found this other world where people are like, yeah, but we're trying to figure out this. We're learning, we're communicating, we're working together. And that is the real value of the martial arts journey. The techniques, boxing, wrestling, judo, any of those will do you. Most people will never need them. Most people will once they have them won't use them because they already have them. It's like when you see a hammer in someone's pocket and you're like, oh, okay, hey buddy, I'm just gonna keep walking. You got a hammer in your pocket. That comes through personality and presentation. And that's what I see happen to people when they go into martial arts schools and then come out. They come out different because they're like, I'm not afraid. Like I know what to do if I have to do it. Because if it needs to be done, I'll do it. And that's a different mentality than I don't know what to do and this is scary and you know, I don't know what to do.
So segue from martial arts, like, do you listen to music? I would just like to know what's your favorite, like, if you listen, favorite band or favorite music to listen to when you train?
So weirdly enough, I read this study eons ago when I was a bodybuilder. When I was in prison and I was focusing solely on bodybuilding. The sport hadn't been invented yet. And the study was on the type of music and the strengths, the variance of different types of music. So they took bodybuilders, took them in a gym, and they let them listen to X music and then listen to Y music, and then they measured the strength on it. So I read this thing, I'm probably in my early 20s, and it says love songs are the most powerful energy creator when you lift weights. Love songs. And so I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So I went all in, nothing but love songs when I lift weights, when I do boxing. Yeah. It's just love, whole country. Yeah, all the stuff. Um, but I realized it's an emotional connection that for whatever reason makes us stronger. And if you're deep in your emotionality, if you're deep in your presence, for whatever reason, it actually makes you stronger. I never heard the beat in hip hop or house music until I started boxing full time. Because someone said, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I go, "I'm trying to," and they're like, "Dude, just punch to the beat." And I go, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, every time there's a beat, punch the bag." I go, "Oh my god, it's here." I'd never heard the beat. Like my brain doesn't work in that function. And then all of a sudden I can hear it. And now when I hear it, my body starts moving. It's like, all right, well, let's do the thing. So there's all these ways to train your body and train your mind to where um, you don't even know you're getting better. You just know you feel better. And I think that's the secret value of martial arts, right? Is you come in going, I don't know what to do. You walk out going, I know exactly what to do, and this is what I'm going to do. It's such a change in so many people, and that was my real like that. That's what sold. When I go out and speak now and I do business stuff, they're like, well, what's your real thing? And UFC champion, that's fine. And I go, no, 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 bro, that's not it. I go, I convinced America that cage fighting was a good idea. I go, think about that. It's not a good idea. But because I love martial arts so much and did so much for me, I was able to speak so passionately and say, you don't understand. This is a great idea. In hindsight, I realize it's not a good idea. But the values of martial arts, the training, the community, the focus of mind, body, spirit, that stuff is a great idea because it makes great people.
Who is like the goat for you?
I don't know anybody fighting. All I know is I like John Jones. He's good,
Okay.
very, very
Oh, let's
talented.
just. Oh, this is nice. Just
He
list your
tried to
top
wrestle
five.
with me one night. He tried to wrestle with me one
Hmm.
night in Alabama, Missouri. I don't know, but he put his hand on me, giant hand. He was like 5 inches taller than me. I'm like, no, bro. Like, what are you doing? He's like, I just can't wait to get my hands in there. I'm like, no, I'm old. You're giant. I'm like, no. But super, super talented. Yeah, most people don't realize like I'm 5'10", 185 pounds, 183 pounds, and I fought all those giants because there were no weight classes. It wasn't like I was trying to fight giants. It's just that they were big and I wasn't. I couldn't get any bigger, and I don't believe in steroids and stuff. I was a huge fan of BJ Penn. I took him to his first UFC fight and trained him, um, and so I've always been a fan of him. I'm a huge fan of Mark Coleman because we've just been friends forever since literally the Eon days. Maurice Smith, the first heavyweight kickboxer. He's my best friend, and I trained him for his UFC fights and all of his other championship fights, and then he trained me in kickboxing. We traded. It was one of those trades back in the day. It's like, hey, you know this, I know that. Let's try to figure this out, man, and help each other. And it's made a 30-year friendship. I just called him yesterday. I was like, bro. Um, so yeah, those are my guys. But here's the funny thing: I don't watch the sport. I have no idea what's happening. You know, I have no idea. But if a company or someone calls me to consult on something, I'll do it and I'll figure it out. But guys, the human body hasn't changed in 100,000 years. So if you're studying the body and you're studying biomechanics and you're studying science and you're doing active tests, the results are going to be right in front of you. So that's where when I left the sport, I was like, yeah, they'll be good. They'll be fine. They got all the information they need. And if this thing just keeps being studied and practiced and exercised, it'll grow exponentially. And the next gen will be these crazy athletes that have all this information that took me 15 years to gather. And they'll have it on day two, day three. And they'll have a mindset that oversees that allows them to progress 100 times faster than we could ever do. Because we were still trying to figure out who the master was, what was going on.
You know what's the weirdest thing about this whole conversation is that like I just realized that sharing your talent with other fighters actually benefits you
Yeah,
instead of just
True.
keeping it to yourself.
100%. Yeah,
That's
Right.
just so weird. Like
yeah,
because if I'll be fighting Tito Ortiz, I won't be showing him my skills because we might fight again.
yeah.
So where did that come from? Why are you sharing this information with other fighters? You know that in the future you
Yeah,
might fight them.
yeah, yeah. It came out of necessity because, when you walk into a martial arts school, you expect your master or teacher to know what's going on, right? That seems commonplace. You go, you go to math class. You figure your teacher knows math, uh, and I just because I'm smart, because I grew up on the streets, because I went from, I was in prison, but I was in college in prison, so I was like building my mind, building my body, building my mind. So when I got out, I wasn't a street thug. I wasn't a tough guy. I was a semi educated, active physical person. And I was very interested in this. And I ran into all these different problems. The first one, nobody really knew how to fight. Like, no, they really didn't. They were like, "Oh yeah, do this," and I'm like, "Well, did somebody test it?" They're like, "No, but you know." And so it took me about 3 months to figure out people didn't really know how to fight because they couldn't articulate. They were just like, "Yeah, well, so and so showed me his so and so friend, you know, whatever, whatever." So that's why we're doing it. And so it just in getting into the understanding, my life was at risk, my body was at risk, and so I didn't care if I looked like a dork or a nerd or, you know, asked the wrong question or whatever. And all these different communities had all these different rules. In fighting, you know, you just fight. You don't ask questions. In martial arts, you never ask questions or question the master. You just do what you're told. And so all these rules exist that I wasn't aware of, but because I was at risk, I didn't. I just kept moving forward. And they would beat me up because I'd ask questions. I'd be like, "What about this?" and the biomechanics, and what about this angle? And they'd be like, "Well, get out here." And they'd just beat me. But what they didn't understand is every time they beat me, I was like, "Okay, that's how his body is working, and that's how it works." And here's a new move, and okay, I'm choking. I'm going to figure that one out. And so everybody was teaching me, whether they wanted to or not. Everybody was giving to me. The bodies were giving to me the knowledge. Even saying I don't know was giving me knowledge because I'd be like, "Oh shoot, okay, well he doesn't know, and he's the master. We got, you know, how do we figure it out?" So just being honest and in those positions of needing to know things, like needing to understand, um, it made it all possible. And it cut through all that stuff. Eventually, all the martial artists were like, "Yeah, man, yeah, let's talk about that. You know, let's work through this." And that era, because there was a large percentage of, you know, like say the jujitsu people would never train with me because of the whole, you know, Shamrock work out. He'd be like, "Yay!" We'd show up at the gym, and
Right.
then he'd be like, "I'm so sorry, I can't work out with you because, you know, of the Gracies." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, what?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, because of this, that, whatever." And all I could think of was, "Wow, all that knowledge is just going to stop right there, and I'm going to keep going." And that's what I did.
Do you have a message for my fellow Filipino martial artists? Any message?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've been to the Philippines. I've fought and had Filipinos on my team. Um, they're passionate, focused, they're courageous. Like, if you look at the history and how you got your guys' arts, you guys went through some hardcore shit, which makes the you people and that spirit hardcore. And so, um, if you bring that spirit and that passion to your performance, to your training, to your study, you'll find success. You 100% will. And because I see it in every culture that's like this, that has a strong martial art. You know what I mean? Like, you know, all these arts didn't just come from nowhere. Like you guys got, you know, bad shit was happening, and so you went, "Nope, we're gonna figure this out." So we're better. That whole psychology, that whole thing carries on into this moment. And if you want to perform, you bring that into your performance. You bring that into your study. You bring that into your community. Success every time.
Frank, thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.